to an 85-man roster ahead of flying to Minnesota for their joint practices. I'm going to be breaking down the roster. I'm going to be breaking down everything coming up in a few minutes, so stay tuned.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the 49ers RedZone podcast. I am Rohan, your host, and unfortunately, my co-host Marco could not be there today, but instead, the 49ers, and they kind of just changed it on us. They gave some extra news today. 85-man roster is now complete because the 49ers have a cutdown day this Thursday. However, they don't want to fly out 5 extra players for people that aren't going to make the team. So they cut 5 players today from their roster ahead of flying to Minnesota, where there are going to be joint practices on Wednesday and Thursday of this week ahead of, I believe, what is Saturday's game. So that was the big news today. The 49ers making their cuts. The cuts itself happening today wasn't the surprise, but the players was interesting. So the 49ers, here are the 5 players that they cut. Defensive lineman Tomasi Lalil, wide receiver Keyshawn Johnson, fullback Josh Hokett, cornerback Darqueze Dennard, and then the 5th player, I believe I have it up here. I don't remember off the top of my head. Let me get the 5th player right now. But they did cut down to 90, or actually, no, they only cut 4 players today because I assume due to the PUP and all those kind of rules. So, 49ers cut 4 players today. The biggest one being Darqueze Dennard, the cornerback, obviously veteran cornerback who had been taking a majority of the first team reps. Now, I'm going to tell you why I wasn't surprised by the move, and you guys let me know whether you believe this move was good or not. Now, as always, be sure to hit that like button. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you guys are enjoying the content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers, as well as subscribing to the 49ers RedZone podcast. Be sure to follow us and then hit us up on the Spotify and Apple Music as well. We'd greatly appreciate if you download our podcast. But going back to our 85-man roster talk, Darqueze Dennard, that was the biggest cut. He's a veteran who's been taking a majority of the first team snaps. Many believe that he could be the favorite to start at cornerback. And throughout camp, I had reported exactly who was playing out there, but I didn't, me and Marco has been saying it for a long time. Darqueze Dennard was likely not to make this roster. The 49ers have a ton of cornerback depth right now, whereas if they're going to spend a 53-man roster spot on Darqueze Dennard, they would lose out on one of their investments in which they spent a draft pick on, be it Tariq Castro-Fields, who they spent a 6th-round draft pick on this offseason and who's looked pretty good in the initial look. Be it Samuel Womack, a 5th-rounder, be it Diamond Lenore, another 5th-rounder from last year, or Ambry Thomas, a 4th-rounder, because you have those 4, and then you also have Charvarius Ward and Emmanuel Mosley alongside Jason Verrett. So those are 7 cornerbacks I just named there on a team that normally keeps only 6 cornerbacks. So overall, this was, in a way, an expected move for a couple of months now, especially with Samuel Womack now being relegated primarily to the slot after seeing some time at outside corner during OTAs. So an expected move. Darqueze Dennard, though, getting cut very early in the process indicates that the 49ers are very confident in Samuel Womack. Now, normally cuts like these where there is a battle in camp going on, no matter how expected the move might be, normally these cuts only happen from the 80 to the 53-man roster on August 30th. However, Darqueze Dennard getting cut this early, especially without a lack of depth at the slot corner position, because Dante Johnson himself is also injured, and so that leaves only Quantrez Knight there. That shows an immense amount of confidence in Samuel Womack, who will almost assuredly take over as that slot corner 1 role now and play the entirety of the reps with the first team after starting with the second, or after playing last week's game on Friday with the second team. So interesting news there. As I said, me and Marco both expected this move. However, it is a little surprising that this move happened early, which is only positive news for the 49ers as they continue to develop their young guys. As for the other players, fullback Josh Hokett was going to get cut regardless. Again, happening this early when the 49ers like to install with fullbacks normally in their offense, right? Because with the backup offense, Josh Hokett was that fullback, and we saw it on Friday as well. But he got cut. Now, if you guys are fans of Josh Hokett, don't lose hope. I assume Hokett will make it back to the 16-man practice squad, which has expanded this offseason with the new rules in place now with the practice squad. I think Josh Hokett will be one of those guys, especially because other teams don't use fullbacks now. So I don't think he goes claimed. I believe he has under 4 years of service, but I don't think he gets claimed. And I think the 49ers would sign him back to their practice squad because he could be the eventual Juszczyk replacement, given the amount of years he has in the system, and that Juszczyk is now on the wrong side of 30 once Juszczyk either retires or his contract is over. So that could be a thing you see in years to come, which is why I think it'd be smart if the 49ers continue to utilize the fullback as they have to keep one on the roster on the practice squad. Looking at the other two names, Tomasi Laulile, that was an all right cup. I didn't really see too much away from it because Tomasi Laulile, he was the last defensive lineman, or him and Akeem Spence were the last two defensive linemen signed, and Akeem Spence looked better so far compared to Laulile. Nothing against Laulile, but Spence, I believe, was signed after Laulile, has looked better and seen more reps with the earlier teams as opposed to the later teams. So Tomasi Laulile, that's an expected cut given the 49ers have such immense depth at the defensive line position, and because the 49ers are expected to get Hassan Ridgeway back from injury, I believe, this upcoming week, which means that the 49ers will get another player into that rotation. Remember that one of the reasons they signed a guy like Tomasi Laulile originally is because they were lacking at interior depth with Hassan Ridgeway and Arik Armstead both out, meaning that you didn't necessarily have enough players to cover through the interior. But given the amount of guys that rotate on the interior, like Kerry Hyder, Charles Omenihu, and even Drake Jackson at times, Tomasi Laulile is an all right cut, in my opinion, given that he was never slated to make the roster. So this lowers the 49ers defensive line room to, I think, 16 bodies now, which is still absurd heading into the second phase of the preseason. But a ton of players still on the roster. Like I said, 85-man roster. Only 5 were cut. Or only 4 were cut so far, and then 5 will be cut by next Thursday. It could be earlier, it could be later, because the 49ers do travel to Houston. So it could be likely, if they fly out early, it could be earlier, or it might be on that Thursday itself. But 5 more players to be cut. Edgar, thank you for tuning in, saying 49ers Red Zone. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to the show. Now, continuing on with the 85-man roster, the last player to be cut was Keyshawn Johnson. Now, this one surprised me a little bit in a way, but also in not necessarily as much in other ways. Keyshawn Johnson obviously was the player who caught the 2-point conversion fade this past Friday against Brock Purdy from Brock Purdy to give the 49ers a 7-point lead in the game. And overall, Keyshawn Johnson hasn't looked necessarily bad in training camp. The reason that this surprised me, I think Johnson is lower on the depth chart than both Marcus Johnson and Tay Martin, while Malik Turner right now is the solidified 6th receiver. But Keyshawn Johnson, Austin Mack, those were the two kind of that I could see being cut. And the 49ers went with Keyshawn Johnson, which surprised me a bit. Austin Mack has been a player who has struggled with drops the entirety of training camp and the entirety of the preseason. We saw him drop a pass this past weekend as well against Green Bay, and then he's dropped consistent passes over training camp as well. And while he has the ability to get open at times, he has struggled to catch the ball, especially in open space, which is a little concerning. Yet the 49ers do seem to like Austin Mack overall because they have they've played him a ton, right? They play him a ton on Friday. He played a lot more than Tay Martin, who in my opinion right now is a better receiver. They played him a lot more than Keyshawn Johnson as well, who only really saw extended time when the third stringers, the backup of the backups, were in with Brock Purdy. And so they do seem to like Austin Mack, who is 24 right now. He's a little bit more experienced than Tay Martin and Keyshawn Johnson as well. They're around the same experience. So it was surprising a little bit that they didn't cut Austin Mack given his drop issues, but they do seem to like Austin Mack. He's played a little more in training camp and in the preseason in that first game. And then as well, when you talk about special teams, the one other reason it was surprising is because Austin Mack has not returned punts or kicks all preseason, while Keyshawn Johnson has been one of 4 that have rotated in that spot. So that was a little interesting as well. The break, because you had a guy who also played special teams, which if you had injuries, you could potentially rely on or even see what they had during the preseason as well. But Keyshawn Johnson, he is now cut, which means that there is no reunion with an Arizona Cardinals receiver like there was last year, with Trent Sherfield. You don't have that 2 years in a row. And the 49ers now are continuing on to face the Minnesota Vikings this week in joint practices. Now, these are practices, right? But in reality, these practices might be more important than the game. Now, why do I say that? Well, the 49ers have already announced, head coach Kyle Shanahan, that is, that Trey Lance will not play in week 2 of the preseason just because the 49ers have 3 games in 12 days. So it's a scheduling kind of concern. They don't want to injure, obviously, or cause risk of injury with so many games in such little time. So the 49ers are sitting Trey Lance in this game. However, he will play in both of the scrimmages, and those will be the 2 times where you can see Trey Lance against a defense that isn't the 49ers this week. And so hearing reports from my guys like David Lighty and guys like that who will be at training camp, at the practices itself, that might be an interesting thing. And I see a comment about Kellen Mond, who is getting lit. He is going to have to face his first team defense. And even without the cornerbacks, this defense showed that it's fairly strong. And so Kellen Mond, a bit of a struggling start to his career over there in Minnesota, especially not having the kind of like the confidence of his old coaching staff. We'll see how he plays over here. But continuing on about the 49ers Vikings joint practices, Trey Lance had a bounce-back day today in practice, throwing 11 of 14, according to Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat. Bounce-back day in terms of accuracy after struggling a little bit yesterday. And he actually hit the deep out, which is something that he has missed at times, thrown too wide or overthrown. He hit the deep out apparently to Deebo Samuel today, which was a big sign because when you talk about Trey Lance, it's been inconsistent, right? At times we saw a great showing in the preseason game, and now he's looking to build on it heading into these joint practices. It's going to be a different defensive look. The Vikings have a fairly solid offensive or defensive line. Who knows how many of them will play, but it's going to be a bit of a different defensive look. Let's see how Trey Lance works through these 2 practices. Can he get through his progressions? Can he overall kind of hold up? And I also am excited to see how chippy these practices will get because it's a joint practice. They're going to be a lot of jawing. And while the 49ers don't have their number 1 trash talker, Jimmy Ward, who likely will be sidelined with an injury, it's going to be a fun time. And talking about Jimmy Ward, I think that that's a good place to transition because unfortunately the 49ers announced their injuries today, or they announced them a couple of days ago. And one injury that wasn't on the list that recently popped up, Jimmy Ward, who has a hamstring injury and now is unfortunately but feared to potentially miss week 1, according to Kyle Shanahan. Ward has been one of the bigger components of the 49ers defense, and Ward really, his versatility and leadership on that defensive end is one of the most important parts of that defense and why it collaborates and works as well in cohesion with each other. And so that is going to be a huge loss. The one thing is the 49ers do play the Chicago Bears week 1, so you don't necessarily need Jimmy Ward for that, or maybe even the Seattle Seahawks in week 2. But come week 3, hopefully that hamstring injury isn't too rough where Ward misses extended time, especially because the 49ers play the Broncos and the Rams in back-to-back weeks in week 3 and 4. Now, Let me share some optimism about the 49ers safety room. They've got Talanoa Hufanga and Tarvarius Moore, as well as George Odom. Now, while none of these players right now are superstars or anything close to that level, they're more so around average starting level safety play. The 49ers have a versatile group of safeties. Hufanga uh, features well in the box where his shorter range is fairly good and his instincts are good. His tackling and aggressiveness are there. Whereas Tarvarius Moore features best in the back end. And so when you talk about his speed, while he did have really a great preseason game in game one, he has the speed, the requisite speed needed to go from the middle of the field to the sideline, where throws to Darnell Mooney in week one could potentially reach that back sideline, and so you have a guy who could probably cover that ground. Now, Moore has to work on his angles. Moore has to work on his run defense. And so those are different things where you're going to miss the presence of Jimmy Ward. But you have a versatile group because you have an athletic guy, you have a guy who is ferocious and aggressive in the box, and then you have a surefire tackler in George Odom who earned All-Pro honors in 2020 after recording 20 special teams tackles without a loss. So you have a different group of guys. While all of them aren't necessarily as good on their own, it's still a versatile group, and the 49ers have shown before that they can probably find ways to mesh with lower level safety play than they would expect with Jimmy Ward. There's one example from last year, the Arizona Cardinals game, where both the 49ers starting safeties were out, and the 49ers safeties did not look good. That was Tavon Wilson, Talanoa Hufanga. The Arizona Cardinals ran all over the 49ers and really imposed their will with Colt McCoy at quarterback. And so that obviously is a concern back then, but I still think the overall infrastructure of the 49ers right now is a little stronger, especially defensively, where they won't necessarily have to rely on their safeties to make plays. They can blanket their safeties and, kind of help. D'Amico Ryans can scheme in a way that helps them out while also playing to their strengths. With Moore being his speed, with Hufanga being his instincts, with Godin being his tackling, play to their strengths. Haha here says that this is a much weaker defense without a healthy Jimmy Ward. Now, if this injury is long term, then yes. But it depends. We'll wait to see the diagnosis of the hamstring strain. Hopefully, it doesn't cost him more than like a month, because you got about a month before week one. And even if he misses week one, that's fine. Get him fully health. But I don't think this is a long term injury from what it sounds like. Although he is feared to miss week one, I think you can afford to have him miss 2 weeks before coming back. Still, 49ers defense continues to face injuries, Jimmy Ward being the latest. Dante Johnson got injured on Friday. You already have your top two cornerbacks currently injured. Mosley is likely to return this week, but Charvarius Ward has a like a groin strain or a muscle strain. That might take a little bit more to recover. We'll see if he will end up being ready for week one. And so, couple of injuries kind of piling on for the 49ers, which has been a theme very, very recently, and it's interesting because Kyle Shanahan talked about how a lot of these injuries are coming off days where the 49ers probably, like today on, what was it? On Sunday, yesterday, it was a light practice, a very light practice, according to beat writers. Yet the 49ers still face their injuries with Jimmy Ward. And so it is a bit concerning. Kyle Shanahan said it himself that these injuries continue to occur, but hopefully the 49ers find a way where they don't necessarily have to, or they can at least find a way to avoid these injuries, be it with their practice schedule, be it with their off days when the season starts, and when you're out of this 3 games in 12 days mold in the preseason. So we'll see what the 49ers do. How do they combat this? Because if injuries continue to hamper the team, the ceiling of this team and the expectations of this team extremely get lower, because that has been a big part of this organization. And while they have a ton of depth, they also are dependent in a way on their quality players. You can't just casually miss a guy like Jimmy Ward for 8 weeks and expect to be fine. D'Amico Ryans can do his best. And a lot of people talk about how the 49ers work with Josh Norman, work with Diamador Lenore and Ambry Thomas and stuff when they were out. But it's not like those guys weren't giving up plays. Norman gave up a ton of pass interference penalties. Ambry Thomas gave up a couple of catches at the catch point deep down the field. Diamador Lenore got cooked in a couple of games, especially against the Seahawks, right? So it's not like they weren't giving up plays. It's just the 49ers were able to work together as a unit to overcome those mistakes. But how sustainable is that algorithm? I don't know, especially going to the second year where the 49ers have maybe faced issues in the secondary. Prayers up to Jimmy Ward. Hopefully this injury doesn't cost him more than 2 weeks into the regular season, where the 49ers likely will need him a lot more. But that is an interesting point for sure. All right, guys, that's going to do it pretty much for today's episode. A quick 20-minute episode talking about the 85-man roster, talking about Jimmy Ward, talking about 49ers Vikings. Me and Marco will likely be back here on Wednesday breaking down the 49er Viking breaking down the 49ers Vikings joint practices, breaking down that on Wednesday, maybe even Thursday. So stay tuned for those episodes. The game this week, we will be doing a recap either after the game or the day after the game. So stay tuned for that as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Get that subscriber up to 700 right now. On the way to 700, on the way to 1,000. So thank you guys so much. I will catch you guys in the next episode.